Hello, church history friends. I'm Barb Walden, and I am excited to welcome you to the winter series tonight. Tonight, in our Meet the Historian series, we will welcome Cheryl Bruno and John Dinger, and we'll learn more about the fascinating life and legacy of William Marks. Tonight is the second of 3 evenings for our winter series, where we get to hear about some of the latest church history books. So last week we gathered with Kyle Walker to hear the story of Catherine Smith Salisbury. If you missed it, you can always catch a video recording of the program on our website or our YouTube channel. Now we're looking forward to next week when we will sit with Matt Harris and learn more about Black Americans in church history. To save your seat in next week's program, be sure to follow the link that Wendy will drop in the chat. In addition to marking your calendars for our winter book series, we hope you'll also include a weekend in Kirtland on April 12th through the 13th. I really hope you'll join me over Palm Sunday weekend as we gather with some of Community of Christ's great storytellers, people like Lachlan and Kristen Mackay, Seth Bryant, and John Charles Duffy. The weekend event will explore church history through engaging class sessions, through walking tours of the historic neighborhood that surrounds the Kirtland Temple, and we'll take a look at the Kirtland Mills Burying Ground, which is just across the street from the Kirtland Temple. So there'll be plenty of time for fellowship throughout the weekend. It won't be all church history. We'll have a lot of time surrounded by friends. This is a joint event between the Community of Christ and the Community of Christ Historic Sites Foundation. The weekend will draw to a close with a Palm Sunday service in the lower court of the Kirtland Temple, where soon-to-be Prophet President Stacey Cram will share the morning message. Registration information for this special weekend in April will be released soon, but in the meantime, mark your calendars for April 12th through the 13th and an enjoyable weekend of Community of Christ history in Kirtland. While you have your calendars out, you might as well save the dates for our spring lecture series this May. We'll be hosting a number of great storytellers over the first 4 Thursdays throughout the month of May. So stay tuned for additional details about this series, as we'll share it all at the end of our series next week. Oh, and friends, as I shared last week, there is a new internship position available in the Alma Blair internship program. Not only is this a great opportunity for professional experience in the field and a paid position, the intern will get to work with people who have lived and breathed church history. It's a hands-on opportunity to preserve the past. So for more information about this summer position and to apply, follow the link that Wendy is dropping in the chats. And lastly, none of these online programs, events, summer internships would be possible without your generous support. Thank you so much for your donations and your monthly gifts. For those who are interested in making a gift tonight, you can see there are 3 easy ways to support the Historic Sites Foundation through online giving and gifts through the mail. Wendy will drop the online link in the chat for those wishing to make a donation tonight. We know there are a lot of outstanding educational organizations out there to support, and we thank you so much for thinking of us. Thank you, friends. Now, speaking of great programs and great people, joining me tonight are my co-hosts, Peter Smith and Wendy Eaton. Peter serves as a board member for the Historic Sites Foundation and a co-host on our annual bus tours, while Wendy serves as the administrative assistant for the foundation and the assistant archivist for Community of Christ. Welcome, Peter and Wendy. I am so glad you're here. And speaking of presentation, it's a joy to introduce you to our guest speakers. They may be familiar faces. You may have seen them at the John Whitmer Historical Association conferences and Mormon History Association scenes, or you may have seen them from past online lectures here with us. Cheryl Bruno has a BS in Recreation Management from Greensboro College and did graduate work in educational psychology at Brigham Young University. She is an independent researcher on Mormon history, co-author of tonight's book on William Marks. It's a great book. You should get a copy. She's also co-author of the book Method Infinite, Freemasonry and the Mormon Restoration. Additional publications from Cheryl include articles in the Journal of Religion and Society, the John Whitmer Historical Association Journal, and the Journal of Mormon History. Cheryl has also presented at the Mormon History Association's annual conferences, the Claremont Mormon Studies Conference, the Pacific Northwest Regional Annual Meeting of the American Academy of Religion and the Society of Biblical Literature, the John Whitmer Historical Association's annual conference, Sunstone Symposium, and the Mormonism and Western Esotericism Conference. In addition, Cheryl is director of resident life at Madonna Gardens Assisted Living and Memory Care. She has published personal essays and poetry in several anthologies and has created a deck of Mormon-themed tarot cards. And we're lucky to have her here. And while I'm making introductions, let me introduce you to John Dinger. John is a graduate of the S.J. Quinney College of Law in the University of Utah, Salt Lake City, where he was an editor of the Utah Law Review. In addition to a Juris Doctorate, he holds degrees in political science and history from the University of Utah. He has published in the Journal of Mormon History, the John Whitmer Historical Association Journal, the Idaho Law Review, and Utah Law Review. His book, The Nauvoo High Council and City Council Minutes from Signature Books, won the Best Documentary Book Award from the Mormon History Association and the Best Book Award from the John Whitmer Historical Association. In 2013, he published Significant Textual Changes in the Book of Mormon, the first printed edition compared to the manuscripts and to the subsequent major LDS English printed edition that was published through the Smith Pettit Foundation in 2013. John is presently a deputy prosecuting attorney for Ada County in Boise, Idaho, and a member of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. So that's a lot about our presenters, and they are quite knowledgeable people, and we are so glad that they're here. Thank you, John and Cheryl. I'll turn the spotlight over to you as we are all ready to learn about William Marks.
Thank you. I think I'll be the one to get started today to talk to you a little bit about William Marks. John and I were so excited to be able to write this biography on William Marks. It seems like most people know a little bit about William Marks, but not a lot. And there hasn't been a biography on him or much written before John started writing about him a few years ago. And there have been a few little sketches of him, so people are a little bit familiar, but we were so excited to be able to really dive in and learn a lot about his life. So we want to share just a little bit of that with you tonight. And if you want to know more about his life, you can go to our biography. Let me see if I can get the screen share up here. Okay. And there we go. All right, so we are talking about William Marks today. And this is really the only picture that we have of William Marks, but it's really wonderful. It kind of just shows us a little bit about him and his personality. This is our book. The cover art for the book was done by a local artist in Utah named Christina Freeman, and I really love how she captured his face, kind of almost mournful in a way. He went through so much with the restoration, and yet also strong and capable man. William Marks was a little bit older than Joseph Smith. They were born about the same area in Rutland, Vermont, and Sharon, Vermont. And William Marks is, I guess, 13 years older than Joseph Smith. So when he joined the church, the Mormon church, he was kind of seen as a respectable older man in his 40s. After being born in Vermont, he and his young family, his wife, moved to Nunda, New York. And this is kind of a little view of Nunda. And it was kind of the 1830s, about the time that he was there. I think it was from 1819 or so to 1832. They had 9 children here in Nunda, New York. It later became Portage. So while he was living there, it became Portage, New York. And let's go on. Okay, so this is kind of the scenery of where he lived, the Genesee River Valley. So when he moved to the Genesee River Valley, his Rosanna, his wife's sister, was already living there. Polly Adams, she was married to Prosper Adams, and Prosper had been one of the first ones to move to the area and had this tavern that was a little south of the locks that you see here. Isn't that really interesting? He sold the tavern to William Marks, who ran the tavern for the next 15 years there in Nunda, New York. And here's kind of a map of the area. The green area is where the tavern was located. And this whole area was part of Nunda until 1828, and then it split into Portage Township and Nunda Township. So the little blue arrow is Oakland, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happened in Oakland. So William and his wife Rosanna became part of the Presbyterian Church in Oakland. And the church started about 1819 with about 6 members. Rosanna's brother was one of the original members, and they all invited 6 more people. So Rosanna and William were part of the second kind of group of people that joined the church. So he started out as a Presbyterian, and they met in various places, barns and all over the place. This is the Weisner School, and it was established before 1831. So the Presbyterians met here in this building from 1831 to 1834. And you can kind of see over there on the side, I don't know if it's blocked for you, it's kind of blocked for me, but that's a record that John and I were able to find from the Presbyterian Church so that we could learn a little bit about William Marks before he joined the church. Past authors have always said, well, we don't know much about William Marks before he joined the Mormon Church. But we were able to find a lot about what he did as a Presbyterian. So that was so fascinating to me. His 9 children were baptized in this church. And here's kind of a little view of Oakland in the town of Portage. And this is, we don't see, William Marks wasn't living here, but they would travel over here to go to church. And so William and Rosanna knew this one man, and they, as part of their tavern business, they would sell him liquor, and he was a member of the church. It wasn't against their church regulations to drink, but it was to get drunk and to act in a disorderly way. So this man was called up before the Presbyterian Council to talk about his drinking. And William was one of those people who, it actually took place in William Marks's home. They met at least twice in William Marks's home to talk about this man and what to do with him. And if you'll look over here on the right-hand side, kind of in the middle of the page, you see William Marks and how he testified that this man bought bitters from him. And so it was in the book, we talk about how this was really the first time that William Marks was sat in judgment on a person's church membership. So as a Presbyterian. This church right here is their first actual church building that they built in 1834. And later on in 1846, they sold it to the Methodists, and the Methodists put it on logs and scooted it across the street. And it's still there. Well, at the time of this picture was taken, it was still there, and it was named the First Methodist Church. And it's the oldest standing church in those 3 towns that are right there in the area. So now let me tell you a little bit about how William joined the church. And it was right about the time that the Saints were moving to Missouri for the first time. And as you know, they got kicked out of the state. They were having really a lot of difficulty with people who were threatened by them moving in so quickly. And so Zion's Camp was a group of kind of a semi-military group that was put together to march from Kirtland to Missouri to keep order and to keep those people from getting kicked out. And so Joseph Smith wanted to amass a group of about 500 men and to go on a march and go over to Missouri. So Parley P. Pratt and Lyman White, who were living in Missouri, came over to Kirtland, and they started doing a kind of a canvass of the area to try to drum up some volunteers to join Zion's camp. And they went into New York, where William Marks was living at the time. And on March 8th, 1834, they held a meeting, kind of a church meeting, but also to get volunteers to go on this march of Zion's camp. And where they went to preach, three men lived on a little corner. Each had a homestead, kind of next to each other. And these were Warren Cowdery, the brother of Oliver Cowdery, Samuel Miles, who was William Marks' brother-in-law, married to his sister, Prudence, and Heman Hyde. They were all men of about the same age. They were all in their 40s. They all had large families, and they heard about this meeting. And they all, well, Warren, of course, had heard about the church before from his brother Oliver, so he knew about the Mormons. The others were interested in investigating what the missionaries had to say about the church. And so they all went, and gradually, each one of them and their families joined the church. Heman Hyde's son, who was 21 years old, was really excited and volunteered right away to go in Zion's camp. The other men were, these three men were pretty busy with their activities, so they didn't go to Zion's camp, but they became stalwart members of the church after being baptized. There's a little story about William Marks that I thought was just fascinating. And it's about an indigent woman who became ill. She was quite old. And William Marks, this tells us a little bit about William and Rosanna. William Marks and Rosanna took her into their home and helped her out, invited the missionaries to come and give her blessings. I guess a whole crew of them. This isn't her. And it is kind of a folk tale, so the picture is apropos. But the missionaries would come and give her blessing after blessing, and William and Rosanna took their prize chanticleer, their rooster, and killed it and made a soup for this woman. And she drank the soup, and soon she was bopping around and jumped up out of her bed and was fine. And so many people took this as a sign that the missionaries' blessings had done some good. And William Marks later was said to have wondered whether it was the blessings or whether it was the nourishment of the rooster that got her better. Okay, so what this is, right about the time when William Marks and Rosanna and her sister and several other people joined the church, and the Presbyterians were put out about that. And so in our book, we talk about the reasons why they were upset about the Mormons, because in their records, often people will go and join the Methodist, and that seems to be just fine. They'll write down in their records, so and so joined the Methodists, and that's fine. And then Episcopalians weren't liked quite as much. So when somebody joined the Episcopalians, they marked down so and so absconded to the Episcopalians, but they still were fine with it. When they joined the Mormons, though, they had a real trouble with it. And so they talked about how they were violating their covenants, and they were treating their ordinance of baptism with contempt, and they were promoting division. They were treating the Presbyterian Church as if it were not the Church of Christ, and many other things. It talks about the delusions that the Mormons had, that some had the gift of tongues, and some said they had revelation from God. They have the gift of healing and prophecy, as we saw with the healing of the woman in William Marks's home. And so those are all the things that they were upset about with the Mormons. And so they excommunicated William and Rosanna and her sister. But they were already members of the church, so I guess they weren't too upset about that. Soon after, William Marks was made a a leader of the church branch in his area. And this is his certificate, his elder certificate, that was signed by Franklin G. Williams. And I thought this was really cool to see William Marks's name and how he had this certificate. And he reported on, I think, 3 branches at a conference they had in Freedom that year. Soon after that, he began to gather with the saints in Kirtland, Ohio. So here's Kirtland. And there's the Kirtland Temple. You're all pretty familiar with that. So William Marks, when he moved to Kirtland, we don't really know why, but for some reason, Joseph Smith really trusted him from the beginning, from the minute he moved to Kirtland. And he began putting some land in William Marks's name and putting some of the church publications, the Messenger and Advocate, he put under William Marks's direction. And he and William Marks and his wife, Rosanna, were deeded the Kirtland Temple as well. So what we think is that Joseph Smith at the time was embroiled in the Kirtland banking fiasco. And we think that he was trying to keep this church property from falling into the hands of others who wanted to take some of the church property to pay for his debts. So Joseph would put it into the name of William Marks, and then William Marks would take care of it while all of this was going on. So it seems like only, I think, a week after the Kirtland Temple was deeded to William and Rosanna, Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith pulled out of the Kirtland Bank, and so we could tell it had something to do with that. So William Marks is the owner of that Kirtland Temple for a while. And here is Kirtland Village in 1837, just after William Marks moved there. The top green arrow shows where, let's see, did it move? Well, it moved just a little south, just a little north of that green arrow. You can see William Marks, where his home was. And down a little north of the bottom arrow, oops, we kind of messed up there, is the temple site. It's a little black dot, and you can see that a little bit on that Kirtland Village there. So William Marks owned a lot of properties there. He took care of the temple. He was made a member of the High Council, and he was also made the stake president over Kirtland. And so when the Saints started moving to Missouri for the second time, William Marks helped people get organized, to get moved, and he stayed there for several years just helping to get the property taken care of and helping people move over to Missouri. He was one of the last to go over to Missouri from Kirtland, and got there just as the Saints were being kicked out of Missouri. So although he tried to gather to Missouri, he got there virtually the day that they left, and then was on his way to Nauvoo. So I'm going to stop here. Here's William Marks's home in Kirtland. You can see that he was a prosperous man, that he was able to build himself a home. There were people living in shanties and everything else, but he did have the means to build himself a nice little comfortable home there. And here I am last year in front of the William Marks home. Nancy, do I have the right one? I hope I got the right home. But there it is. And with that, I'm going to turn the time over to John to tell you a little bit about the later life of William.
All right, thank you. I am honored to be here today talking about William Marks, a man I admire very much. He has such an interesting life, so it was difficult to decide what to speak about tonight. I've always considered William Marks sort of a Kirtland Mormon. That's the Mormonism he loved best. He was reluctant toward the innovations at Nauvoo. So after the death of Joseph Smith, I see him seeking for, really longing for that Kirtland Mormonism. And I believe he found that with Joseph III and the RLDS Church. And so I'd like to kind of speak about his journey sort of between Josephs, and how he returned to Joseph III. So in the immediate aftermath of Joseph and Hiram Smith's murders, Emma pushed for Mark's ascension as leader of the church. She needed someone who she could trust that would help her in the financial situation she was in, and someone who opposed polygamy, and William Marks fit these descriptions. So as early as July of 1844, as people started to discuss and wonder who would lead the church, many claimants stepped forward. Marks never did, though he played a major role in this succession. And so he's not usually thought of as a serious contender today when that's discussed, but Emma believed that he should have been the successor at that time. In April of 1845, she spoke with her children's teacher, James Monroe, and shared her feelings. He later recorded in his journal, "My time has not been spent wholly without profit, as it has been occupied chiefly in conversing with Aunt Emma, from whom I have obtained several new and interesting ideas concerning the organization and government of the church. The next officer to the president of the High Council in line, the next officer is the president of the High Council in line, and not one of his counselors, any more than the Secretary of State or of the Treasury would be successor to the president. It is not the 12, because they have authority only among the branches of the world, and their peculiar provision is to spread the gospel among the nations of earth. The High Council have all power, and it follows that on removal of the first president, the office would devolve upon the president of the High Council in Zion, and that would be William Marks." So Sidney Rigdon, he was the surviving member of the First Presidency, and after the death of Joseph Smith, he returned from Pittsburgh. And so immediately after this time, Marks saw Rigdon as the proper legal successor to Joseph Smith. Rigdon claimed that he was the proper guardian of the church, and so Marks called for a meeting. On August 6th, W.W. Phelps tried to stall until the members of the 12 Apostles return, and he didn't have to wait long, as Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, Lyman White, Orson Pratt, Wilford Woodruff, they all returned to Nauvoo that night. So on August 8th, 1844, a meeting was held at the request of William Marks, in which both Rigdon and Brigham Young spoke. And the majority of the attendees favored the 12 apostles. And so after this decision was made, Brigham Young told the crowd, quote, "The next is President Marks. Our feelings are to let him stand as president of the stake as heretofore." And so whether this was a heartfelt expression or an implied threat, Brigham Young made clear with his statement that he believed Marks was serving at the pleasure of the 12 apostles. Now, as I stated before, Sidney Rigdon did believe that he was the proper successor, and he made that push. And so we have this battle between Brigham Young and Sidney Rigdon. And sides were drawn and accusations were made, debates were had, and Marks honestly seemed to fall somewhere in the middle. And so after that August 8th meeting, the vast majority again went with the 12, but Marks, he was kind of marked by that time, and Young didn't trust him anymore, and it was shown. And so a short time later, rumors started to spread that Marks was not willing to follow the 12, and he was accused by William Clayton of trying to draw off a party. And so he was summoned to appear before the 12 the following day. And this episode sort of set off a chain of events where Marks was just mind-numbingly obligated to prove his loyalty again and again until finally he left. And so Young led that meeting and told Marks that in consequence of rumors and reports of the proceedings of him and Elder Rigdon, he had called them together that the thing might be talked over and, if possible, a union effected. Young then told Marks what he had heard, likely the rumors that Rigdon and Marks were planning on forming a church in competition with the 12. And so Marks denied the charges, but he also stood up for himself and claimed that he had been abused by the tongue of slander. And so at this point, Marks had no intention of resigning his office or leaving the church, but he did share concerns that he had about the actions of the 12 apostles. He, quote, acknowledged that the course the 12 had pursued was contrary to what he had expected. And so Marks resented the way that the 12 were asserting their authority since the death of Smith. And this challenge kind of cleared the air by putting his uneasiness into words without attempting to grasp power. And so at the moment, he was able to navigate that difficult time with integrity, and the meeting was ultimately pronounced beneficial to everyone. We even have a repentant William Clayton, stating that he would never listen to reports again. But this temporary peace didn't last long, and it was shattered on September 8th, 1844, when the High Council and really the 12 apostles cut off or excommunicated Rigdon in a public meeting in Nauvoo. And so minutes of the meeting state that, quote, the High Council was organized with Bishop Newell K. Whitney at their head. And how that occurred, I honestly don't know. Mark should have been at the head. Nonetheless, it was an absolute pile-on. Brigham Young, who was not a member of the High Council, acted as both witness and prosecutor. And none of the proper procedures or rules were followed that day. And so you had Young, Orson Hyde, Parley P. Pratt, Amasa Lyman, John Taylor, W.W. Phelps, and Heber C. Kimball, who all testified against Rigdon. And so while the meeting was conducted under unusual circumstances, Marks did his best to make sure that it was carried out according to High Council rules, revelation, and this was all to his own detriment. After watching what was happening and hearing all the claims made against Rigdon, especially irrelevant ones, like he had brought mob violence against the people in Missouri and he would do it again, Marks followed the High Council protocol by personally offering a defense of Rigdon. Quote, I will take up the opposite side, he said, because he had always, quote, been a friend to Rigdon. And because according to Revelation, someone from the High Council was always to stand up in behalf of the accused. And so in doing this, Marks must have known that to defend Rigdon in public would put him even at odds with the 12 than he had been to that point. However, Marks did what he knew was right and offered a defense. And he countered many of the apostles' arguments and set in motion his treatment and expulsion from Nauvoo. And it was this hearing where he stood up to those in power because he was loyal to Joseph Smith and his revelations that really impressed me, and I knew he deserved more attention and a biography of his own. And then Marks was ultimately kind of harassed and threatened until he left Nauvoo. And so after Marks left Nauvoo, he first settled in Fulton, Illinois. And while he didn't live there long, he did like it enough to help convince Emma Smith and her family to move to Fulton for a short time. And this move likely occurred in September of 1845, and they lived a quarter of a mile from the Marks family. And it was in Fulton where Marks first became associated with James Strang. Joseph III wrote that while they were living in Fulton, quote, Elder William Marks received a visit from James J. Strang. And so Joseph III saw him at the home of Marks, where there was to be an evening meeting, likely a time for Strang to try to put forth his claims to convert both the Marks and Smith family. Shortly thereafter, both families left Fulton. The Smith family moved back to Nauvoo, and the Marks family moved to Shabbona Grove, Illinois. So we next hear about this on December 28, 1845, when Aaron Smith, a Strangite missionary on his way to Nauvoo, wrote, quote, from St. Charles, we started towards Shabbona's Grove, intending to visit President William Marks, late president of the stake of Nauvoo. So as Strangite missionaries were trying to convince Mark of the truthfulness of their message, he was also becoming a leading figure in the Shabbona Grove community. He was elected Justice of the Peace, and oddly, just 1 month after being elected a judge of men, he was appointed to be a judge in Israel by the Strangites. At their general conference on April 6, 1846, William Marks was appointed and ordained bishop of the church. So the following day, he participated in the excommunication of Brigham Young and many of the 12 apostles, as he was one of the voting members of the newly formed High Council. And so with the participation in this trial and this excommunication, it made clear that Marks no longer believed or supported in the Brigham Young-led church, and he had found a new religious home. However, almost immediately after this conference, his participation with the Strangites started to wane. Marks never explained this, but I think Cheryl and I showed that his lack of activity directly corresponds to the time that John C. Bennett joined with the Strangites. 2 weeks after Bennett joined with the new church, another conference was held at Voree on July 20th, 1846, and Marks was not in attendance, and it was likely that he resigned all his positions at this time. And if you read our book in the chapters on Nauvoo, you can see sort of the conflict that John C. Bennett and William Marks had in Nauvoo. Honestly, I think you could almost call them, opposites. I kind of imagine Joseph Smith with, like the old cartoons with the angel and the devil on each shoulder, and William Marks was certainly the angel in that situation. But by April of 1847, Marks started to re-engage with the Strangites. And while he had a great dislike for John C. Bennett in the past, it appeared that he was willing to work with him for the good of the kingdom of God. And Marks would attend Strangite conferences, but he would never move there. And I think that kind of bothered certain Strangites and James Strang, but he would never move. And then on April 4th, 1848, Isaac Scott wrote to William E. McClellan and said, William Marks has left Strangism, but still Strang seems determined to make some capital out of his ism before it is numbered with the things that were. And so after the Strangites, Marks joined with Charles B. Thompson. And like Strang, Thompson attracted many individuals that would later play a role in the reorganized church, such as William Marks, James Adams, James Blakesley, and Josiah Ells. And by April 15th, 1852, Thompson had enough followers to hold a meeting known as a solemn assembly with Marks in attendance. Days later, Thompson wrote to his church, signaling out the importance of William Marks as one of his adherents. In describing Marks to his congregants, he wrote, quote, he was appointed president of Nauvoo stake when it was first organized on the 5th of October, 1839, and continued in that office until after Joseph's death. On the 7th of October, 1844, he was superseded in his office by John Smith because he boldly protested against the usurpation and corruption of the 12. So while Marks was certainly welcomed because of his talents and abilities, he was also being used to lend legitimacy to Thompson and his group, just as Strang had. The fact that Marks joined this group and was writing for the church's paper signaled to other non-polygamous saints that Thompson had credibility. However, Marks did not join Thompson with the same enthusiasm as he did the saints or the Strangites. Just a week after the solemn assembly, he wrote a friend and later member of the reorganization, James M. Adams. And in describing the assembly and his conversion, he wrote, I arrived there on that day with but little understanding of the work and about as much faith. For I have been so often disappointed that I had become fearful and unbelieving, and with a determination to be very inquisitive, for I have learned from experience that it is a very... So regardless, Mark started working on the committee regarding the gathering of a new church. And honestly, putting him on this committee is somewhat odd, considering his past objections to a gathering and his unwillingness to gather with the Strangites. 1853 was his last full year with Thompson, and in June 1853, he wrote a letter to the church that is sort of the most oft-quoted or thing that most people know about William Marks, and that was his claim that Smith repented and changed his views on polygamy right before his death. And so the following spring, in April of 1853, some 20 families had gathered to the gathering place. And the Zion Harbinger, Thompson's newspaper, recorded that a few days after the solemn assembly, Marks visited the members and told some that he was going to move to Canesville, where he was making arrangements to build all the necessary buildings for use of his family. So they claimed that he was going to gather. However, in a private letter to Adams, he told a very different story. He told Adams that he did visit Canesville and found, quote, that there were a great many that was quite dissatisfied, principally with the time tithing. So Mark spent about 10 or 12 days there and concluded, quote, I came to the conclusion that there was the greatest oppression that I ever saw imposed upon a community. And so because of what he saw, he decided not to gather and in fact to leave Thompson. And so by June of 1855, he left Thompson's church. But he continued writing to James Adams, and he said, I came to the conclusion in the forepart of last winter to reject all organizations. He described his time with Thompson and others as false pretensions and false prophecy and foolery that had been going on for the last 10 or 12 years. Referring to Thompson and others, he said, quote, I have long wandered in darkness and following false prophets until I had become tiresome and weary. And so after his rejection of Young, Strang, and Thompson's organizations, he decided he would only teach the first principles of the gospel. And so while not officially joining with anyone, he did know that there was quite a number in this region that shared his view. Specifically, he noted that John E. Page is one. And so the following year, in 1856, he started to meet more formally with W. Blair, John E. Page, and John Gaylor. And they agreed to call a conference and to organize. And the point of this was to meet and discuss the subject and try to get a starting point, and not complete an organization then, but try to come into union and to concentrate on faith and strength. And so this group of believers continued to meet, and many joined their ranks, including Edmund Briggs, Israel Rogers, and James Blakesley, who later became leaders in the reorganization. And so Marks officially joined with the reorganization when he was baptized on June 11th, 1859 at Amboy, Illinois. And at the time Marks joined with the reorganization, the Utah Saints started rewriting Marks' history. In a discourse given by Heber C. Kimball in 1859, it stated, "If William Law, William Marks, and hundreds of others had known that Joseph was a prophet, they would not have betrayed him, not tried to take his life." And so this marked a shift from merely considering Marks an apostate to now him being involved in Smith's murder, which of course is just absolutely and patently false. So for years, Joseph III, the son of Joseph the prophet, had been courted to head the reorganization, which he would continually turn down until March of 1860. And so Joseph III described the events years later. He wrote, "During the year 1859, the question of my connection with my father's work was finally determined. I became satisfied that it was my duty. In the winter, I resolved to put myself in communication with the brethren of the reorganized church. In accordance with this resolution, I wrote to William Marks, announcing my intention to make the effort to take up the work left by my father." So while there were many people he could have written to, including the church as a body or as a whole, he chose to write to Marks. He wrote to Marks and stated, quote, "I am soon going to take my father's place at the head of the Mormon Church, and I wish that you and some others, those you may consider most trustworthy, the nearest to you, come and see me." Marks went to Joseph III and he joined the group. On April 6, 1860, Marks ordained Joseph III as the leader of the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. 3 years later, Marks was called and ordained as a counselor in the First Presidency of the reorganization to offer counsel and help lead the people. He served in this role until his death in 1872. In Marks' obituary, Joseph III wrote, "Brother Marks was one of the noblest of men. He has lived a life of most singular usefulness to his fellow men. Kind and upright in thought, it was known of him that his acts were founded in a consciousness of right, and what was wrong to him, he would not do." And I think that final line, "what was wrong to him, he would not do," was the guiding principle that sustained him while he went from one Joseph to the other, finding that Kirtland Mormonism.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you, Cheryl. Thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. We have a lot to learn about William Marks, without a doubt. And thank you for highlighting his story with so much of this excellent research. He just seems like a man of justice and a man of honor and integrity. Um, what an incredible person. So thank you for helping bring his story to life. Well, friends, look at the time. It's been another wonderful night of church history. Thank you so much, John and Cheryl, for sharing with us your knowledge, your continuing questions about William Marks. You have definitely captivated us tonight. Thank you, thank you. Also, a great big shout out to Peter and Wendy for helping behind the scenes and making it all look so easy every week. And lastly, we share our thanks to you, our friends in the audience. Thank you for continuing to support the Historic Sites Foundation and continuing to read your church history. We do have more coming up. I encourage you all to tune in next Thursday as we welcome Matt Harris to the Winter Book Series. Matt is going to dive into his new book, Second Class Saints, Black Mormons and the Struggle for Equality. In addition to his book, he will also explore the Community of Christ and LDS Church's response to the civil rights movement. He's going to look at how both traditions viewed racial equality, how they fought it and/or embraced it, and how they came to accept Black members as integral to their worship communities. Matt's presentation will also draw on his 2023 article in the John Whitmer Historical Association Journal, Wendy will drop the registration link in the chat for us. We hope you will join us. We also hope that if you enjoyed tonight's program and want to learn more about William Marks, please pick up the biography, Come Up Hither to Zion. It's by Coford Books, and you can find it online. So again, everyone, thank you for joining us. Until next time, keep reading your church history, and please do take care, friends.